My name is Emma Hartley. I'm 29 years old. 14 days before my wedding, my own father looked my fiancée dead in the eyes and said, "She's a liar. Always has been. She had a bastard child at 18 and tried to trap a man with it." My mother leaned in with venom and hissed, "Don't let this trap you, too. She abandoned her own daughter, like trash. She's rotten to the core." I sat there at the table, silent, while the two people who were supposed to love me tore my soul apart in front of the man I loved. I didn't defend myself. I didn't cry. I didn't run. Because what my parents didn't know was that my fiancé had already found her. He had spent the last 6 months quietly undoing everything they destroyed. And they had no idea she was walking into our rehearsal dinner. That night, everything they tried to bury came back to life. And everything they thought they controlled completely shattered. Before I go any further, if this story is already hitting you in the chest, please take a second to like and subscribe and drop your location plus local time in the comments below. I love knowing where in the world you're listening from right now. I'm Emma. This is the story of how my own parents tried to destroy my life and how the daughter they forced me to give away came back to save it. Now, let's go back 3 years earlier to a hospital corridor when I saw him again for the first time in 8 years. December 20th, 2024. Jack proposed on the rooftop of his Lincoln Park apartment. It was freezing. Lake Michigan looked like a sheet of steel under the city lights. He'd set up candles in mason jars because he knew I'd think it was cheesy and love it anyway. When he got down on one knee, he said, "I lost 8 years with you. I don't want to lose 8 more days." I said yes before he finished the sentence. The ring was a vintage sapphire, his grandmother's. He told me once that she was the only person in his family who understood him. "Family heirloom for the family we're building," he said. We set the wedding for June 20th, 2026. Fourth Presbyterian Church for the ceremony, the Palmer House Hilton for the reception. Classic Chicago wedding. I sent out 128 invitations. My mother called the day after I mailed them. "White roses are so common, Emma. What will the church ladies think?" I'd picked white roses because they were simple, because I wanted the day to be about Jack and me, not about impressing Cynthia Hartley's church friends. But I didn't say that. I just said, "I like white roses, Mom."
She sighed.
"Well, it's your wedding." She made it sound like a threat. Jack's family was different. His parents drove down from Wisconsin the week after we got engaged. His mother cried and hugged me for a full minute. His father shook Jack's hand and said, "You picked a good one, son." His sister Sarah pulled me aside in the kitchen and said, "I'm so glad he found you again. He was lost without you." I didn't know what to say to that, because I'd been lost too. I handled most of the wedding planning alone. My mother offered to help, then criticized every choice. I kept a seating chart on my desk. Every version, I moved my parents' table farther from the head table. Final version, table 8, near the exit. I told myself it was just wedding stress, normal mother-daughter tension. I was wrong. Early March, my best friend Megan cornered me in the hospital break room. Megan is a nurse too, pediatrics. She sat down her coffee and said, "Your mom's been asking weird questions. How long have you and Jack been together? Does Jack know your history?" My stomach dropped. I stared at my lukewarm tea. She doesn't know about Sophie. She can't. Megan's expression said otherwise. Maybe you should tell her before she finds out another way. There's nothing to find. Closed adoption means closed. No one knows where Sophie is. Not even me. I believed that when I said it. A few days later, my phone rang. My mother. "We need to talk about the wedding and about Jack. Why don't you both come to dinner? Saturday at 6. I'm making pot roast." It wasn't a request. I almost said no, but refusing would have caused weeks of guilt trips. So I said yes. Jack just put his hand on my shoulder and said, "We'll go together." I hung up with a feeling I couldn't name. It felt like walking toward a trap I could see, but couldn't avoid. To understand what happened at that dinner, you need to understand what they'd been hiding for 8 years. Fall 2013. I was 16, a junior at Evanston Township High. Jack was 18, a senior. We met in the library. He was sketching building designs for his architecture portfolio. I was supposed to be studying for calculus. He showed me a drawing of a house with a wraparound porch, big windows, trees. Someday project, he said. When I have a family. He gave me that sketch on my 17th birthday. I still have it. We dated for 2 years. He went to IT for architecture. I planned on pre-med at Loyola. My mother tolerated the relationship barely. December 2016. I was 18, freshman year. I missed my period. I took the test alone in my dorm bathroom. 2 lines. Positive. I should have told Jack first, but I was scared and stupid, and I thought my mother would help. So I drove home that weekend and told her. I was crying. Mom, I'm pregnant. I don't know what to do. She didn't hug me. She just said, very quietly, "You're going to fix this." I knew what she meant. I'm not getting an abortion. Her face went cold. Then we'll handle it another way. That's when everything changed. They pulled me out of college, locked me in their house in Evanston. They cut off all contact with Jack, used my email to send him a breakup message. He called. My mother answered my phone, told him I didn't want to talk. He tried for 2 weeks, then he stopped. I wanted to run every single day, but I was 18, pregnant, no money, nowhere to go. My father made it clear. If you contact him, we cut you off. No college, no car, no phone. You'll have nothing. So I stayed, and I let them plan my daughter's disappearance. August 10th, 2017, 3:42 in the morning, Evanston Hospital. Labor took 16 hours. My parents were there, and the adoption social worker, a woman with a sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. I gave birth to a baby girl. 6 pounds, 8 ounces, dark hair, perfect. I asked to hold her. My mother said, "It's better if you don't." Clean break. But a young nurse placed my daughter on my chest for 90 seconds. That's all I got. I tried to memorize everything. The weight, the warmth, a tiny birthmark on her left shoulder shaped like a crescent moon. I whispered, "I'm so sorry." Then my mother said, "That's enough." The nurse took her away. I was sobbing, couldn't stop. I asked, "What's her name?" The social worker said, "The adoptive family will name her." They offered me a sedative. I said yes. When I woke up 6 hours later, she was already gone. August 11th, I signed the relinquishment papers. Closed adoption. No contact, no information. No updates ever. My mother stood over me while I signed. "You'll thank us when you're older," she said. I went home and locked myself in my room for 3 weeks. My parents converted the nursery into a guest room within a week. "No point dwelling," she said. I started therapy that October. My therapist told me, "You experienced a traumatic loss. Grief doesn't have a timeline." I said, "But I chose this, didn't I?" She looked at me for a long time. "Did you?" Every August 10th for the next 8 years, I called in sick, drove to Evanston Hospital, parked in the same spot, and counted the years. I'd whisper, "You're 5 today. Do you like kindergarten? Do you have my eyes?" No one answered. In my closet, I kept a small box with 8 birthday cards I'd written, but never sent because there was no address. I switched to nursing school at Rush University. I couldn't save my daughter, but maybe I could save someone else's. I graduated in 2021, started at Lurie Children's Hospital in the pediatric unit. I kept minimal contact with my parents, holidays only. We never talked about what happened, but I thought about her every day. While I was grieving, Jack was living his own version of hell. He finished IIT in 2020, started an architecture firm, took on projects around Chicago. He told me later every relationship he tried felt like replacing me. In his sketchbook from 2018, there were pages of house designs, all of them with a nursery facing east labeled for morning light. He didn't know why he kept drawing it. 2022, Jack's firm got a contract to design an expansion for Lurie Children's Hospital. He'd be on site for measurements. Pure coincidence. March 15th, 2023. I was doing rounds on the 4th floor. An administrator walked in with an architect to measure the space. The architect turned around, and I saw him. 8 years. He looked older, sharper, but it was him. He said, "Actually, we know each other." I couldn't speak. He asked, Coffee, please? We sat in the hospital cafeteria. 2 coffees getting cold. We talked for 3 hours. He said, I never stopped thinking about you, and I never understood why you left. I told him the truth, most of it. My parents forced us apart. I was pregnant when they separated us. I had a daughter, born August 2017, given up for adoption. What I didn't tell him, because I genuinely believed it, was that the baby was his. The timeline was close, but in my grief I'd convinced myself it was someone after him. I was wrong. But I wouldn't know that for 2 more years. April through December 2023, we started dating again, slow and careful. He asked about my daughter often. Do you know where she is? Closed adoption. I have no information. Would you want to find her? Every single day, but I don't have the right. We fell in love again. Deeper this time, because we knew what losing each other felt like. In November, Jack started coming to therapy with me. I thought he was trying to understand me. I didn't realize he was building a plan. December 20th, 2024, the proposal. That night, I told him something I should have said earlier. I got pregnant right around when we broke up, December 2016. I've always assumed it was someone after you. A rebound. I was so messed up. I don't even remember clearly. Jack went quiet. Then he asked, Is there any chance it could be mine? I don't know. Maybe. His face changed. Not anger, determination. If she's mine, if our daughter is out there, I need to know. I told him to let it go. 3 weeks later, he ordered a 23andMe kit. January 2025, Jack did the DNA test. He told me it was for ancestry. Results came back in February, standard European breakdown, no close family matches. Jack stared at the screen. Nothing. I said, I told you she's probably not even in the system. He nodded, but I could see the disappointment. What I didn't know was that DNA databases update constantly. And 6 months later, everything changed. August 2025, a couple in Oak Park, Rebecca and Daniel Foster, were having a conversation about their 8-year-old daughter Sophie. They'd adopted her as a newborn, always been open with her about it. At her last checkup, the doctor asked about family cardiac history. Rebecca said, Unknown. She's adopted. The doctor suggested a genetic test for medical records. That evening, Rebecca mentioned it to Daniel. What about one of those DNA tests? They ordered the kit. Sophie thought it was fun, spit in the tube, mailed it off, forgot about it. September 3rd, 2025. The results came back. The system immediately flagged a match, close family match. Benjamin Morrison, possible father. Rebecca and Daniel stared at the screen. The name meant nothing to them, but the age and location matched the timeline. They realized this might be Sophie's biological father. At the exact same time, Jack's phone buzzed. New email from 23andMe. You have a new close family match. He opened the app. Match level. Close family, possible daughter. Name Sophie F. Parent managed account. Age 8. Location Illinois. Jack told me later, I stared at that notification for an hour. Sophie, born August 2017, Illinois. It had to be her. But he didn't tell me immediately. He needed to be absolutely sure because raising my hope and being wrong would destroy me. So he hired a private investigator, a former Chicago detective who specialized in adoption reunions. The PI worked fast. Property records in Oak Park, a Rebecca Foster, pediatrician, and Daniel Foster, high school teacher, dependent child, female age 8. School enrollment records, Sophie Foster, 3rd grade, Oak Park Elementary. The school website had class photos. 2nd grade, front row, purple shirt, dark curls, gap-toothed smile. Jack told me later, the photo showed a little girl with dark curls and my smile and your eyes. And I knew beyond any doubt she was ours. September 21st, 2025. Jack sat me down in his apartment, serious face, gentle voice. I found her, he said. I thought he was joking. He showed me his phone, the DNA match, the PI report, the photo. I collapsed. I don't remember the next hour clearly. I know I cried. I know Jack held me. I kept saying, how? How is this possible? Then he said, Emma, the match says I'm her father, not someone else.
Me.
That broke me all over again because it meant I'd lost 8 years not just with my daughter, but with the father of my daughter, the man who would have fought for us if he'd known. October 2025, Jack hired a family law attorney, Helen Strickland, a specialist in adoption cases. We weren't trying to take Sophie back. We were trying to see if the adoptive family would be open to communication. The attorney sent a formal letter to Rebecca and Daniel Foster. It was a request for voluntary reconnection, not a legal challenge. We waited 3 weeks. No response. Then Rebecca called the attorney back. Rebecca's voice was warm and kind. I got your letter, Daniel, and I have always wanted Sophie to know her birth parents. We tried to maintain contact after the adoption, but we were told the birth mother wanted no contact, a clean break. My blood went cold. I'd never said that. My parents had. Rebecca continued. Sophie asks about her birth mother every year on her birthday. We've told her we'd help her find you when she was ready. We had no idea you were looking too. She said, We're not threatened by you. Sophie is lucky to have so many people who love her. We'd be honored to arrange a meeting. We set it up for February 14th, 2026, Valentine's Day, supervised by a family therapist. The Foster home in Oak Park, a blue Victorian with flower boxes. Sophie walked in, small, 8 years old, dark curls, wearing a purple dress. She looked at me. Are you Emma? I nodded. My voice stuck. She said, I've been waiting to meet you. She held a photo album she'd made, construction paper and glitter, titled Sophie's Life. It's pictures of me growing up, so you can see what you missed. Every page was a punch to the chest. She narrated each photo matter-of-factly. When she finished, she looked at me and asked, Did you want to keep me? Yes, I said. I wanted to keep you more than anything. But I was 18 and my parents said I couldn't. They said you'd have a better life with another family. I've regretted it every single day since.
She processed that.
Then she said, Then why didn't you come find me? Jack spoke up. Because we didn't know how until now. Sophie showed us her room, sky blue with stars on the ceiling. One drawing caught my eye, a family portrait with 2 shadowy figures labeled with question marks. I drew that last year, she said. I didn't know what you looked like, so I just made shadows. But now I can finish it. She pulled out markers and started adding features. She drew me with long brown hair, a smile. She drew Jack tall, with glasses, even though he doesn't wear them. She labeled us Emma and Jack. Not mom and dad, just our names. And that was okay. Before we left, Rebecca and Daniel sat down with us. Rebecca said, We're not threatened by you. Sophie is lucky to have 4 parents who love her. We agreed to a plan. Weekly visits, gradual integration, building slowly. Sophie made us pinky promise to come back next week. Driving home, I felt lighter than I had in 8 years. And then I remembered my parents still had no idea, and our wedding was 6 weeks away. We visited Sophie 3 times before everything fell apart. Each visit, she opened up a little more, showed us school projects, played violin. By the 3rd visit, she hugged me goodbye, quick and shy but real. On that visit, Sophie asked, Rebecca said you're getting married soon. Can I come? Jack had the invitation in his pocket. We decided not to tell my parents yet, to protect Sophie. That was a mistake. May 15th, 2026, Friday afternoon. My mother was driving through Oak Park to visit a friend. She stopped at a red light and saw Jack walking with a little girl holding her hand. My mother's heart stopped. The girl looked exactly like me at age 8. Dark curls, same walk. Cynthia followed them. Watched Jack drop the girl off at a house on Kenilworth Avenue. She wrote down the address, spent the next 24 hours doing research. By Saturday morning, she knew everything. May 16th, 9 in the morning. My apartment. Someone knocked loud and insistent. I opened it. My parents pushed past me. My mother said, We need to talk about the child. What child? Don't lie to us, Emma. We saw Jack with her. My father said, You found her. After we explicitly told you the adoption was final. I said, "You told me a lot of things that weren't true." My mother's face went red. "We gave you a chance to move on with your life. If you don't end this immediately, we'll tell Jack the truth about you." "He already knows." "Does he know you have no idea who the father is?" The lie came so easily to her. I said, "Jack is the father. 23 and me proved it." Her face went white. My father said, "Even if that's true, that child is gone. Legally adopted. You have no claim." I said, "We're not trying to take her. We're trying to be part of her life. Something you prevented for 8 years." My mother's voice shook. "If you pursue this, you'll destroy your relationship with us." I said, "Good." They left. But I knew it wasn't over. They tried everything. Threats, guilt, bribery, emotional manipulation. Nothing worked. I blocked their number on May 20th. That's when they decided to go nuclear. They'd tell Jack, assume he didn't know, and he'd leave me. Problem solved. My mother called one last time before I blocked her. "If you won't listen to reason, then Jack deserves to know the truth about who he's marrying." I said, "He knows everything, unlike you." June 6th, 2026. 14 days before the wedding. The intervention dinner. My parents had sent a formal invitation weeks earlier, before they even knew about Sophie. Now it was their stage. Jack said, "Let them try. I've got everything documented." He opened a folder on his phone labeled Sophie. Inside, DNA results, emails with the Fosters, therapist notes, photos, legal timeline. "Then we'll disprove it together," he said. We drove to my parents' house in Evanston. The dining room was set formally. Good china, pot roast in the center. 4 place settings. The 4th chair stayed empty. We sat down. My father said grace, a long and pointed one about honesty and truth in marriage. Then my mother served the pot roast. And then, as I was lifting my fork, my father looked at Jack and said, "There's something you need to know about Emma before you marry her."
Pause.
Emma had a baby 8 years ago. She gave it up for adoption and never told you. Jack set down his fork. Very calmly, he said, "I know." My mother blinked, thrown. "You know?"
Yes.
"Emma told me over a year ago." My father recovered quickly. His voice got louder. "Did she tell you she has no idea who the father is? That she was running around with multiple men after you broke up, and the pregnancy could have been anyone's?" My mother cut in, sharp and cold. "Sit down, Emma. The adults are talking." I sat, hands clenched under the table. Jack's hand covered mine. My father continued, "She tried to trap some other man with that bastard baby. When he refused, she gave it away like garbage." Jack set down his fork and looked my father in the eye. "Actually, I know exactly who the father is."
Pause.
"And your daughter isn't a liar. You are." The room went silent. "What are you talking about?" "I'm the father. 23 and me confirmed it 6 months ago." My mother's face went chalk white. "That's impossible." Jack interrupted. August 2017. "Emma and I were together in December 2016. You separated us in January when she was 2 months pregnant. You forced a closed adoption to hide your shame. Should I continue?" My mother's voice shook. "You have no right." "No right to what?" "Know my own daughter." My father stood up. "Even if you're the father, that child is gone. Legally adopted. You have no claim." Jack said, "Actually, we've been in contact with her for weeks." He picked up his phone and set it on the table. "Her name is Sophie. Sophie Elizabeth Foster. She lives in Oak Park with Rebecca and Daniel Foster. Wonderful people who actually love her. And she knows we're her biological parents." He opened a photo. Sophie, me, and Jack, all smiling, Sophie holding a sign that said, "See you at the rehearsal dinner." My mother leaned in, her voice dripping venom. "Don't let this trap you too. She abandoned her own daughter, like trash. She's rotten to the core." Jack's voice stayed calm. "She didn't abandon anyone. You stole her daughter. And you're about to lose your own." My mother stood up, shaking. "If you continue this circus, we will not attend your wedding. We will tell everyone at church what kind of woman she really is." Jack stood too and pulled up a folder on his phone. Let me show you what we have. DNA results proving paternity. Emails with the Fosters who tried to contact Emma for years but you blocked them. Therapist notes. Hospital records. Testimony from Rebecca Foster about letters you intercepted. My father's voice was tight. You've been building a case against us. No, Jack said. We've been protecting Sophie from you. There's a difference. My mother tried one last card. If that child shows up at your wedding, we will stand up and object during the ceremony. I stood up. The engagement ring was still on my finger. I looked at my mother and said, then you won't be invited to the ceremony. You can't uninvite your own parents. Watch me. She sneered. I'm calling the Foster family tonight. I'll tell them you're unstable. Jack said, go ahead. They already know the real story, including your role. We have documentation, and they have lawyers. My mother grabbed my father's arm. She headed for the door, then stopped and turned. You'll regret this, Emma. All of you will. And walked out. The door closed behind them. We drove home in silence for 10 minutes. Then I said, they're not going to let this go quietly. Jack said, I know. That's why I invited them to the rehearsal dinner. I stared at him. You what? He'd sent the invitation 3 weeks ago. He knew the confrontation would happen publicly, with witnesses, so they couldn't rewrite history later. June 19th, 2026. The rehearsal dinner at the Palmer House, a combined welcome party for 40 guests. Jack's family from Wisconsin, my hospital colleagues, his architecture partners, college friends, several church members, and the Foster family. Sophie sat near the exit, so they could leave if things got ugly. My parents arrived late, making an entrance. Cynthia wore navy and pearls. George wore a suit. They looked like the respectable church-going couple everyone thought they were. Dinner started.
Speeches began.
Jack's father stood up and talked about finding your way back to love. Then Jack stood up. The room quieted. Most of you know Emma and I dated in high school. What you might not know is that we were separated for 8 years by circumstances beyond our control. But 3 years ago, we found each other again. And this time, nothing was going to keep us apart. He looked at me. Emma is the strongest person I've ever known. She survived things that would break most people, and she's done it with grace.
He paused.
There's someone else who wants to say hi. He gestured to the door. The door opened. Rebecca Foster walked in holding the hand of a little girl in a white dress with a purple sash.
Sophie.
The room went completely silent. Sophie walked toward the head table, her eyes on me. My mother's face went chalk white. My father half stood, then sat back down. Sophie reached me and smiled. Hi. I'm Sophie. Then she turned to face the room, small voice but clear. I'm Emma and Jack's daughter. Well, biological daughter. I have 2 moms and 2 dads. It's kind of cool. Someone in the back asked, You have a daughter? My best friend Megan stood up. Yes, and it's a beautiful story. Let them tell it. Jack explained briefly, factually. 8 years ago, we were separated. She was pregnant with my daughter, but I didn't know. Her family arranged a closed adoption. Then 23 and me brought us together. Rebecca stood up, her hand on Sophie's shoulder. Sophie is lucky to have so many people who love her. We're honored to share her with Emma and Jack. My mother stood up, voice shaking. This is inappropriate. This child should not be here. Jack's sister Sarah said, Excuse me, who are you? I'm Emma's mother. The same mother who forced an 18-year-old to give up her baby? That mother? Patricia said, We did what was best for her. Jack's father stood up. For who? Certainly not for Emma or Sophie. The room stared at my mother. No one was on her side. My father tried to pull Cynthia toward the door. She shook him off and turned to Sophie. You don't belong here. Sophie looked at her, small, 8 years old, white dress. Are you my grandma? No, I'm not, Sophie continued. Emma told me I have grandparents who didn't want me to exist. Is that you? Dead silence. Cynthia couldn't answer. Sophie said, Emma told me she wanted to keep me, but you wouldn't let her. Is that true? Cynthia stammered. It's not that simple. Sophie said, "It sounds pretty simple." An elderly church member named Martha, someone Cynthia had known for 20 years, stood up. "Cynthia Hartley, I've known you for 2 decades. I have never been more disappointed." One by one, people spoke up. A colleague from the hospital, "Emma is the most compassionate nurse I know. She deserves happiness." Jack's business partner, "This family is beautiful. Anyone who can't see that can leave." Martha said, "Cynthia, you need to leave. This is a celebration and you're poisoning it." My mother grabbed my father's arm. She headed for the door, stopped, turned, and said, "You'll regret this. All of you will," and walked out. The door closed behind them. The room exhaled. Then someone started clapping. Then everyone. Standing ovation, not for kicking out my parents, but for us. For Sophie's courage, for the Fosters' generosity. Sophie looked confused. "Why are they clapping?" I said, "Because we're a family. All of us. All of us." The next day, June 20th, 2026, we got married. Fourth Presbyterian Church, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. 128 guests. Cynthia and Richard were not among them. Sophie was the flower girl, white dress, purple flowers. She walked down the aisle ahead of me. Jack cried when he saw us both. Our vows included the line, "I promise to always choose truth over comfort and love over fear." The pastor said, "Marriage isn't just about 2 people. It's about the family you build together." Sophie stood between us and we took a photo, all 3 holding hands. That photo sits on our mantle now next to the hospital Polaroid from 8 years ago. At the reception, we had our first dance. Then Sophie, still in her flower girl dress, asked if she could join. We pulled her onto the dance floor. The photographer caught the moment. 3 of us holding hands in a circle, all laughing. Rebecca and Daniel watched from the side, smiling, not threatened, just happy. Jack's parents were crying happy tears. 1 week after the wedding, I sent a certified letter to my parents. It was brief and clear. "I will not be in contact with you. You are not welcome in my life, my marriage, or my daughter's life. You had 18 years to be my parents. You chose control over love. I'm choosing differently." I never got a response. I heard later they left St. Mark's Episcopal Church. Too many questions about that granddaughter. They couldn't spin the story anymore. Months later, I won't give you a specific date because it doesn't matter. We found a rhythm. Sophie lives with the Fosters in Oak Park. That's her home. But she stays with us every Wednesday for dinner and every other weekend. We're in family therapy, all 6 of us, and it's working. Sophie calls Rebecca and Daniel mom and dad. She calls me and Jack mom Jules and dad Jack. Her school forms list 4 emergency contacts. She told a classmate once, "I have 4 parents. It's like having built-in backup." Some people ask if I regret cutting off my parents. I don't. I regret the years I spent trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it. But I don't regret fighting to get my daughter back. Some families you're born into, some you build, and some, the ones worth everything, you fight like hell to reclaim. We did all 3 and we're not done.